My name is Cameron Collins. I am the community manager with Sprocketeer, and I am a revenue operations strategist with RevPartners. I've got my co-host Mark. Mark, go ahead and tell the world about yourself.
Yes, I'm Mark Lerner. I'm the Director of Growth Marketing at DealHub. We are a configure price quote solution, native integrations with all sorts of CRMs, HubSpot especially, and very excited to be here.
And this is episode 19 of the Sprocket Pod. Takes me back from well beyond the days of not knowing how to go live. And now we've got some really exciting guests, such as
Exactly.
Rodrigo here. Rodrigo being one of our goats here at Rev Partners. Absolutely amazing at what he does. Rodrigo, go ahead and tell just for those who don't know you a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, my title here at RevPartners, it's called guided onboarding. The way that I see it is basically when somebody buys HubSpot, there's a lot of ways that you can start. And what I give them is all the proper tools to start right. Like it's very important that when you start with a CRM, you know where to go. So I guide them through that. A corny analogy that we use is imagine that you go to the gym and we give you the form, but you do the lifting. So you'll get informed, but I'll just give you the form and I'll make sure that you're there every step of the way. And also that you go to the gym, right? Like it's something that sometimes it doesn't happen. So making sure that happens as well. The guided onboarding is basically called partner scaled onboarding in HubSpot. And with Rep Partners, we call it guided onboarding, which is basically the same.
And guided onboarding is a really interesting place to be because, for example, I work oftentimes with companies that have an idea of this is what we want, this is where we want to go. We have a little bit of familiarity with revenue operations. And you work with all different sizes of companies, but oftentimes they're maybe a little bit newer to RevOps or newer to HubSpot, and they really need that foundation. And that's why today I'm really excited to have you on and to be talking about some topics that really apply to every single business out there. But very seldom do we actually talk about technical and practical things, such as today, where we'll be talking about out of the box reporting and how a lot of those out of the box reports help companies to really find out things that are fundamentally maybe wrong with their business or areas where they can focus to improve. I think that out of the box reports really bring to light some great areas of opportunity for every single business out there. And before we get into the specific reports, I know that when it comes to working with a new partner for the first time, we have our revenue engine diagnosis, and there's going to be a lot of people that don't necessarily know what that means. And there's also a lot of steps that you take to get companies up and running. So I'd love to hear from you, Rodrigo, just in terms of an overview. What are some of the things that you look at, or what are some of your go-tos for taking any business and evaluating, here's how we know how we can help?
So that is a heavy question, but imagine that you have 20, I have 20 companies that I go through in the first 3 months of the year, right? Like I've seen 20 different companies from January to March. And it depends on the company, like the size, the priority that they give to things. So everyone says to me, hey, I want to streamline the process and I want to make it fast. And sometimes the foundational things to get to that reporting are not there, like the data points that need to be there, the integration is done correctly, like everything. So we can go ahead and create the reports, but the data that's showing is completely useless, right? So that's something that I always make sure that, okay, the foundational portion of things need to be there before we actually move along. And it depends if, for example, a C-suite level individual joins the call, they want to get directly into reporting and, okay, how is my team doing? But nobody in the team is using the CRM. So I can see the users and teams go there. And 3 months ago was the last time somebody logged in. It was like, okay, what are you going to report on? Look at this, right? So a lot of times it has to be tailored to who you're talking to. If it's a C-suite level, they have a specific set of things that they want to look at. If it's operational, they have another set of things they want to look at. Or if the person's just an implementation specialist, they have a completely different view of what they want to see. So I see everything and anything that goes on in the middle of that. So trying to ask the right questions first gives you the path forward.
And so we're going to be talking a lot about how to ask the right questions and read between the lines, which is going to be a recurring theme of our show today. But one of the things that I get really passionate about is how to get the most information from really what is oftentimes the most simple pieces of data. And I think a really good example of that is going to be life cycle stages. So again, the
Hmm.
purpose of this show is to give you practical advice and practical takeaways that you can bring to your business and hopefully maybe find areas of opportunity. Again, we're going to make this a very transparent episode. And so when Rodrigo goes into work at any business and he's thinking, okay, what questions should I ask? C-suite, is it the owner, founder? Am I paired with a RevOps person? And this is the same approach that I take. One of the very first reports that oftentimes we look at is life cycle stages. And this is an out of the box report. It is so simple. And there's two versions of this. So we'll look at the other version in a moment, which talks a little bit about conversion rates. But I could look at this report for any business and it's going to tell me a lot of info. And before I get into what I see here, Mark, Rodrigo, I'm keen to hear your thoughts just in terms of reporting and analysis. If you've picked up on any skills or if you have any thoughts and advice for where does one begin when it comes to looking at something like this and then reading between the lines and figuring out what is this telling me?
Yeah, for me, I always like looking at it as a conversion rate so that it looks like an actual funnel looking at. So I know how many started at lead, how many have gone through marketing qualified. But yeah, that gives me the full idea of if the funnel's working, right? As well as areas and where and that's always been the bread and butter of how as a marketer in my marketing world life, it's always been how I've shown the value I brought and areas for opportunity.
In my case, I think the first thing that I always say is this topic is either loved or hated, right? Like when you bring up life cycle stages, the first thing that people confuse is the difference between life cycle stages and lead status. That's the main question I get. Is frequently asked questions. Number one, it would be that. And number two is, can we skip life cycle stages? That's the second question I get, right? So what would you answer to that, Cameron?
This is the important part.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, this is the important part, right? And it really is because it's not fancy, it's not exciting. I think that delivery means a lot here for anybody that's tuned in, whether you are in the C-suite or you work with the C-suite. Being able to communicate why something is important
Yeah.
is just as important as, and so articulation matters here. But let's talk a little bit about that. So, why is life cycle stage important? It tells us a few things. Out of the box, you're going to have lead, opportunity, customer. And you'll notice, obviously, looking at my screen here, for those who can't see it, we have lead, marketing qualified lead, sales qualified lead, opportunity, customer. You can build all of the fancy reports in the world that you want. You can sit here and say, we need to accelerate the number of leads going from opportunity to closed one, new deal into closed one. And we'll talk about sales stages, but I can look at this report and know that, for example, what I see is a company that has a lot of leads that haven't yet been moved through the funnel. Maybe that means that we're putting unqualified people in the pipeline. It could mean any number of things. But now we can start to have conversations around, okay, you have revenue opportunity at the top of the funnel. How do we accelerate that and move those through? Why are they not moving through? And is this a job that marketing needs to lean into? Is it a job that sales needs to lean into? It starts to give us both areas of opportunity and areas of strength because it just tells us the people that we're putting into our CRM, which let's all remember, a CRM is representative of real world data. Like these are real people, they're real companies, they have lives. And so a lead isn't just a lead, but it's a person that for some reason you believe could or should do business with you. So they go into your CRM at the top. Why have they not moved through? And now these are bigger picture questions that we can start to ask and answer. It's again not the most exciting thing, but it is so fundamental and so pervasive through every point of the business. If you are new to HubSpot and you have lead, opportunity, customer, QL and SQL, marketing qualified lead, sales qualified lead, those are two lifecycle stages that maybe you've already taken the time to add. But I can say almost for a fact that most companies and most people listening, I'm curious if anyone wants to add a comment if they've already built this, but who's built lifecycle stages for after the deal has closed? Recurring revenue and non-recurring revenue. are
I've
you
definitely,
tracking that?
I've definitely seen upsell qualified, expansion qualified. Like those are definitely things, as well as product qualified. That's in the PQL world.
Yeah, and to your point, when marketing defines what an MQL is and sales defines what an SQL is, but they don't align,
Yeah.
that passing of the baton, like I use that analogy all the time because it's so effective. It doesn't happen, right? Because you pass the baton and sales says, okay, I don't know why marketing qualified this. And marketing says, well, you should know why. And that alignment, if it doesn't happen, then this report is more of, so we have this amount of SQLs that became MQLs that became SQLs, but the passing the baton, when does it happen? If there's no alignment, we can have all the definitions, we can have the automations, right, in place, and nobody wants to touch them because they're scared of breaking something. But then things are just happening, and these reports become irrelevant for them, and they just focus on what they have to do. For example, they use another CRM that is integrated to HubSpot, and when they see this report, does it tell them something about that passing of the baton? Then we can talk about, okay, once it's closed, we're going to do something afterwards. But if we're not clear on the first two steps, what's going to happen when we get to the other place, right?
And that's where, when it comes to understanding and interpreting the reporting, I think that it's really keen to make note of understanding what are the big picture things that the executive team wants to achieve.
Yeah.
And again, tying that back into the given report. So again, executives are wanting to generate more revenue. They're wanting to get more leads through the funnel. But if you have currently life cycle stages that are lead, opportunity, customer, then again, the basics of the business are being missed. And so what you need to do is really two things here, and that should apply to every single person, both sales, marketing, and customer success. So everyone should know what they're talking about. And that's where we start to play into things like having a source of truth. Rodrigo, I know that we have measures internally at RevPartners that we tend to build for companies to make sure that we have a source of truth. But even if you don't put that in HubSpot, which I will just say I would recommend everyone does, having a list that defines what your criteria for each stage is and having that as your source of truth for the stage. But even if you don't do that, like just taking the time to quite literally sit down in a Google Doc and write down a stage, its corresponding definition, and what you think the quote unquote triggers in HubSpot should be, most organizations and companies haven't done that. And so that's a very real, very practical exercise before we even sit here and talk about conversion rates and conversion metrics. That I would say every organization, if you don't have that in place, day one, right now, go back to your desk as soon as this episode's over and write down your definition for what a lead is, what an MQL is, what an SQL is, etc. And that will help to bring alignment across the board.
And a lot of times we try to find a template before we start, right? Like we want to find the perfect template and we don't just get it going. What I've done in some calls is that I tell them just grab a notebook, right? And write down what you think it is. And then we'll make it happen in the instance. Like we don't need a template. We don't need anything. Just tell me, what do you think a marketing qualified lead is? What do you think? So we'll talk about it and then we'll figure out the triggers. We'll figure out the logic, but just say it out loud and that everyone nods when you say it out loud. You know what I'm saying? Like everyone goes, okay, that makes sense. And then when we have that alignment, adoption will happen. But I always say adoption and alignment need to be there so that people actually turn to the screen and go like this. You need that nod, and the passing of the baton will be more effective.
Oh,
Muted. Yeah,
And
there.
yeah, there we go. That takes us into another point that I think a lot of people will be interested in. And Mark, this is to exactly what you had brought up, the funnel. And that is the movement of contacts through stages and knowing, okay, but how many of my leads are becoming an MQL? How many of those MQLs are becoming an SQL? And the other report that we had on the screen, which didn't show it as a funnel, but rather just showed 300 opportunities. This now opens up a very practical point that I'd like to share that we'll be talking about, which is how do we get contacts to move through each stage? And how do we get conversion metrics? And I'm not going to be sharing the exact workflow that I would typically be using, but it's exactly that, right? You have a workflow that says if somebody is an opportunity and has not become an SQL, make sure that they go from lead, MQL, SQL opportunity. And so, very practically, you cannot calculate conversions. You can't build a funnel. You literally cannot build a funnel and track conversion metrics if stages are skipped when it comes to lifecycle stages. And so that would be the next practical takeaway off of this episode, which is if you don't have some way of moving contacts from lead, MQL, SQL opportunity sequentially, then do that, build that. And if you want to know how to do it and you're not sure, go to the Sprocketeer page, join our community, and ask, because there will be a ton of people that can help you do it. But that would be a very real thing that I would absolutely recommend every single person do today. If you don't feel confident that you have your stages defined, you don't feel confident that people are moving through stages sequentially, go set that up.
Yeah, I would be very concerned if I was looking at a funnel like this.
Yeah. Because what this tells me, this goes back to reading between the lines. What this tells me in concert with the other report is a quote unquote funnel that shows 630 leads, and then nobody is an MQL SQL opportunity. And if we use what was just explained as the rationale here, going back to the other report, what we can see is that in reality, there's 350 opportunities in this business, but because they were skipping their MQL SQL stages, we can't track that in the funnel reporting. And so this is indicative when we start to like really connect these dots and think about how to analyze reporting. Like this is indicative of a company that, okay, maybe they've created various lifecycle stages and they're tracking the amount of opportunities they have, but they're not moving contacts through those stages sequentially because going back to the funnel reporting, nobody's showing up as an opportunity. And that's because historically they were skipping those previous stages.
Yeah, and to be completely transparent, like we all care about revenue, right? But when somebody asks me, like, why are we doing this? What's the reason that we need to do this? The reason is because if somebody's stuck in MQL, for example, there are specific action items that we can take with those MQLs, right? Like we can put them in a list, we can make a specific campaign for them, we can do a series of steps that would make sense for them to move forward to SQL. If we have SQLs, there's a series of steps that we can do to move forward to an opportunity. But if we don't have them well defined and they're stuck in that specific funnel for a reason, then we won't have those action items. We don't have those lists. We don't have the assets to actually move forward the people that are stuck. So that is a very easy way to explain it is we don't want people to get stuck in the funnel. We want them to get to the most opportunities that we can. When they want to skip this step, right? Like we don't need lifecycle stages. Look at how practical it becomes once you do it. And yeah, things turn around when you say that.
And that's a really interesting and fundamental thing that I think a lot of people can take away, which is life cycle stages. It's not exciting. I know it's not something you're going to look back on and go, wow, that's an awesome report you built. But life cycle stages works in concert with so many other areas of the business. And so even though I don't see literal dollar signs on it, what we can do when we extrapolate this out is begin to filter. Now that we have life cycle stages built, life cycle stages could cover the entire customer journey. So this example report stops at customer, but I would encourage everyone to think about after somebody purchases, what happens next? Do you have an onboarding stage that maybe you want to have in here? Do you want to have a recurring revenue stage? Do you want a churn stage? And this is not to say that you need every one of those stages, but again, it covers the entire customer journey. And so once we've defined these and we know that contacts are moving through sequentially, again, we can find out where are our choke points. So do we have a ton of leads that are becoming MQLs, but they're not converting to sales leads? Now we know we need to have a conversation there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mark.
No, go ahead. I was agreeing.
Oh yeah, like we were nodding. To your point, like this, when they get to a specific stage, we haven't talked about the lead status. Like, why do people confuse them? What do you usually answer for that? Because I have my answer, but I want to hear like your answer, Mark. What do you usually answer for the difference between lead status and lifecycle stage?
The difference between lead status and life cycle stage.
I'll try I threw you under the bus. So go ahead, Cameron, and then I'll go back to Mark.
And to be very candid, we have all different types of listeners. Some of you are in revenue operations, some of you are not, some of you are executives, some of you might be in sales. And so different people at an organization are going to have different levels of awareness on these various things where I know, for example, the average sales rep, they're never even going to know that life cycle stages exist because that's really more of a back end thing that
Correct.
executives might look at because they care about the customer journey. Sales only cares about the SQL to close one stage, right, through opportunity, speaking broadly here. So to bring it back to your question about lead status, though, they're very different and they tell us different things. Where life cycle stages tells us about the consumer journey and where they are throughout the entirety of that journey, lead status tells us the level of connectivity that we have with a contact. So if somebody is in a various lead status, it is generally going to correspond to various life cycle stages and various sales stages at that. They can relate to one another broadly, but they tell us different things. The opportunity life cycle stage and their move to maybe open lead status. And so there's a correlation there between somebody who is in SQL stage, maybe they're in contacted, a deal is created, they're moved to open. So there can be some correlation between the two. But again, they tell us different things because somebody who has an open lead status, maybe that means that they have a deal. Maybe that deal is closed won. Maybe that customer has churned. But again, lead status tells us the connectivity. Have we as an organization or have I as a salesperson or marketing person made contact with this person? And if I have, what's happened?
Yeah,
Um,
and I think it also, from a marketing perspective, it is also a trigger for certain things. So one could you could have a marketing qualified lead, but their status is nurture, for example. And so that would be a trigger for the kind of communications that lead is getting. That in our organization we have a similar setup as well.
Rodrigo, keen to hear your thoughts. How do you answer to that?
So I try to keep it as simple as possible. Like lead status is, it has to have connectivity, right? But it has to live on a specific place within the buyer's journey, right? Once somebody becomes an opportunity, we usually go into the pipeline. So it lives between subscriber and opportunity. Lead status is usually used there. Like we have it a kind of a broad way of using it. And it depends on how you want to use it. HubSpot gives you some default values, right? But I always encourage, if you need to add anything that makes sense for your team, just go ahead and mirror it there because they have the words for it, like bad timing. As long as you guys know that it's going to be actionable, go ahead and change the lead status. And it's independent from lifecycle stage. It's some lifecycle stage salespeople shouldn't even know about it. Like for example, someone that's a subscriber, yeah, the salespeople won't know it. Lifecycle stages and lead status is the specific. I love how you said it, connectivity that they have to move along.
And to that point, when it comes to lead status and really using it fully, there's an implication that goes with every single status. And this is something that Mark had just mentioned, which I absolutely agree with, but it does also tell us who maintains ownership of this contact. And that's where oftentimes for newer organizations, sometimes it stays, but I will add an S or an M next to various lead statuses so that we have a defined ownership. And the same exact thing as what I mentioned, where you should be defining your life cycle stages, absolutely applies to lead status. Because if you've gone and told your team that contacted just means we've spoken to somebody, then you are really leaving a lot on the table. Because really, what ought to happen is there should be a level of ownership that's given to every single status. And so if somebody is being nurtured and that goes to marketing, right? Versus if somebody is new and maybe that goes to marketing. And so there's a level of implied ownership, and really everyone should be documenting their lead statuses, what they mean, why you should use them, and who broadly maintains ownership. Now, don't get me wrong, you can have a contact in new that is being owned by sales because they brought that contact in and they intend to work it. Or you can have a contact from marketing that maybe they imported a list. I don't want to get like too pedantic with it, but
Yeah.
if you aren't thinking about this and you aren't defining it, then just expect that there can be a level of confusion or at least a level of arbitrariness that can apply to how your team is looking at lead statuses. And you don't want your team to look at this in an arbitrary manner.
Yeah, we go back to the alignment, right? There needs to be alignment. It's something that I keep repeating, but if there's no alignment, lead status won't work. If there's no alignment, life cycle stages don't make sense. And it goes back to that. And adoption happens once everyone goes ahead and says, okay, we're all in agreement of what this means. Nobody knows what a goal is, except for the people that implemented 5 years ago. So the people like just put a goal when they, I don't know, like they make a sale or whatever, and that's not what it meant in the beginning. So you can go ahead and revisit it because, like we say here in RevPartners, the CRM is a product, it's not a project. So you need that update. So you need to update it, go ahead and change those lead status because if nobody knows what a penalty is or a goal is, go ahead and change it. Like you can change it based on what's the best practice now. I always get asked, okay, can we just follow best practices? And my easy answer to that is the best practice is the one that people actually practice, right? There's no one thing that's the best practice. It's the one that the team goes ahead and train on. Those become the best practices.
No, I think you're mute.
I'm keen to hear because I know we'll be diving in here with sales stage conversion. And I think this is probably one that a lot of people are interested in hearing some thoughts on. And there's definitely a lot to break down. What are some of the things that typically you see, which are the low hanging fruit? So next to life cycle stages, maybe next to deal stage, and we've talked about lead status. Is there anything else that you feel is low hanging fruit that most organizations tend to not quite have right by the time they're talking to you?
Yeah, and that is a pipeline that is way too complicated for what they actually need. So we're talking about a 12-stage pipeline that could be a 4-stage pipeline with different properties on each stages as mandatory. And what I mean by that, I say it simply to move from one stage to the other, make sure that it's robust and it tells a story, right? That you pick up every piece of data that you want. So that is low hanging fruit. That's something that I always see. I see a complicated pipeline and I ask, hey, who can explain this pipeline to me? And then during the call, what we do is we create clarity and we make sure that we know, okay, this stage, this is what's happening from sales activity perspective. This is what's happening for what you need as data points, and we call them mandatory entry requirements, which in HubSpot it's conditional stage properties. So you build it up in a way that makes sense. And what I tell them is that to build it like a pyramid. So when they reach close one, everyone has every single piece of data that they need so that then we can do reports that matter. And this is a good one, like 6 stages, that's good. When I see 15, I just, okay, what? Let's go ahead and see what we can do.
It gets me every time. I think this is a good example of where I know for me, the HubSpot Academy really helped me to learn a lot about sales stages, deal stages that I hadn't necessarily thought about. And an example of HubSpot philosophy that I think a lot of companies really ought to adopt is the notion that sales stages are used by sales reps, but they are for the customer journey. And every stage should
Yeah,
be thought about from the perspective of what actions is the customer taking, now what actions are my salespeople doing. And so if we think about a practical takeaway, an example of maybe things that I would change if this was a pipeline I were actually looking at and a suggestion I would give, like contract sent is an action that a sales rep takes. Contract received is the confirmation that the customer received the contract. There's an implication there. I have sent the contract, they have received it, right? The same kind of thing goes with negotiate, where I would also add to your point in terms of having that pyramid of properties, that negotiation is really more of a holding stage, at least in HubSpot methodology, and something that I do subscribe to. Every stage should have you learning and gaining new pieces of information. Now, if as standard sales practice, you have a negotiation stage because every company has that you engage with has a negotiation, and there are data points related to that negotiation, then that really sounds like more of a one-off to me, and I would challenge that notion, but go for it. So looking at this from the customer perspective, both in naming and in action, and making sure that every single stage you're getting new information. Because if I have somebody in go, no go, and I'm not asking for any new properties and data entries to move somebody to negotiate, but rather I'm relying on a salesperson to just say, oh, we're negotiating the contract. What does that really tell you?
Yeah, and it's what I call holding stages that hold forever, right? Like they just
Yeah.
remain there. There's no nudge to move forward. There's no task created to move forward. There's no path forward, basically. So you need those nudges to move forward. The pipeline is a perfect way to use it to help actually everyone in sales, like seeing it for the day to day. It makes their day better. Just imagine that somebody tells you, okay, I want to get back to you 3 months from today. If you have a property that easily you can assign a task yourself 3 months from today, you don't have to worry about reminding yourself like, okay, 3 months from today, like you can do all that during with the pipeline, if that makes sense.
It definitely does. And you mentioned the pyramid of properties
Yeah.
earlier. This is something that I think every company not only should be doing, but can implement and execute today. It is about 30 minutes to an hour of work, depending on how focused you are. And to show you exactly what we mean when we talk about having a pyramid of properties here, right? If I look at appointments scheduled and I'm asking for identify pain and economic buyer, 99% of organizations out there are not requiring those properties in any of these subsequent stages, which makes sense if we think about, okay, a deal is created an appointment scheduled, we ask for it, it's going to be filled out, so we don't need to ask for it again. And to add to that, now there are deal rules. If you have deal rules, I would review them and implement them. And so one of those rules is you can prevent skipping stages now. But that is to say, if I ask for it in stage one, I should be asking for it in stage two, three, four, etc. And so you'll notice that every property we ask for, we are also asking for in all of the following stages as well. This does two things. It ensures that whether a stage is skipped or if it can't be skipped, you're consistently forcing that person moving the deal through the stages to review, reconsider, and revisit all of these properties. So we ask for in stage one, there's no opportunity for it to get to then closed one and they can say, oh, it's outdated. I didn't know because I forgot to look at identify pain. Because every time you move that deal through a stage, it's going to prompt you to review it. And building a pyramid of everything you ask for, then that is absolutely an area of opportunity that every single person watching this can take back to their organization, implement today, and I promise you, you will have better data in your HubSpot CRM.
And your day to day becomes better. That's what I usually say because you're already doing this just in a different way, right? Like you're either writing it down in a notebook, you're putting it in an Excel sheet, you're doing it anyways. But if you do it all in the pipeline, your day is going to get better. It's going to be easier. You're going to navigate your sales easier because it's going to be all there, and you're going to have the friendly nudges of, okay, you have this, now you're moving to negotiate, but remember, this is the data for X, Y, and Z. If we're dealing with a high volume of deals, this is extremely important because you won't remember out of nowhere. It's just something that I recommend for you to be just a breeze. It's once this is done and people use it, then they go back and say, "Oh, I can't believe we didn't have this from before." And I used to use my notebook. I used to have this. We used to have calls to make sure that people had this information, which can be done from the stages.
So I've talked about a lot of very practical HubSpot tips and things to think about. I'm really curious to hear because I know that we could sit here for hours and hours talking about all different types of content, but what are some of the ways that the both of you, Mark and Rodrigo, have really been able to learn more about like how do executives think? How do I communicate with them? What's in it for me? Which oftentimes anyone in sales is going to know about. But how have both of you learned to communicate a lot of what we've been talking about today?
Yeah, I think from my experience, it's generally, I almost always have come into a situation where these things were known and understood. So I haven't really worked on the agency side that much. I haven't had to sell internally the need or the requirement. It's always been understood. It's more a matter of trying to sell what the funnel should look like, what the stages should be, why. And that's a matter of following the customer journey and understanding, as opposed to being like top down, saying that this is what I think it should be. And therefore we have to fit the way we work with prospects and customers into like my notion of it, as opposed to really the other way, which is building out a customer journey and funnel that meets the actual reality of the situation. That's mostly been my experience.
Yep, and in my case, to add to your point, it depends on who I build it out with, the outcome that we have. So if we're talking C-suite level, they want to look at it straight from everything regarding revenue, right? But then if I talk to the operations, people in charge of operations, their priorities are completely different. And then if I talk with delivery, their priorities are completely different. So when you get a Frankenstein out of those, the analogy that I use is imagine you have a band and the guitar player is doing the mixing in the song. You can hear the solo way too loud, right? If you only have the drummer, the drums is going to be way too loud and the song is going to be muffled in the back. If you have the producer might not even see the vision of the band. So again, talking about alignment is important, but it doesn't make sense for one person to build it. So I always make sure that, okay, are we all in agreement of this? Because it depends on who builds it, how it sounds in the case of the analogy of music, but also in here, what they look at. So it's the first thing that I ask, is everyone in agreement with this? If so, we can move forward. And I deal with CEOs, I deal with people that report to the CEO, right? And then I deal with people in operations, and they all basically want to make their priorities be heard. But it would be good as a team that everyone gets their needs. Like, why did you actually purchase a CRM? Why did you actually purchase specifically the marketing hub, the sales hub, or the service hub?
I think those are great tips. And I think that when it comes to being able to articulate the why, again, the what's in it for me, and helping to make sure that every time we're suggesting something, it's for the betterment of the organization as a whole. And oftentimes the solution isn't we need more reports or we need better reporting, but rather we need more infrastructure. And so the last report that I want to talk about briefly, which is original source attribution and revenue attribution. And again, I'm not going to show all of the workflows and all of the behind the scenes for everything we're about to explain and talk about. If you're interested to see and learn a little bit more, then reach out on Sprocketeer. Let's talk about it more directly as well there in the Slack community. And we can see something like this where, oh, look, unsurprisingly, most of the sources in our CRM are offline sources. And then organizations will drill down and use the drill downs to report on drill down source one, drill down source two. And that helps us to get a little bit closer with, okay, these are the offline sources. And for example, this is a Zoom Info integration contact. But where most companies have difficulty is being able to attribute that back to marketing or back to sales. And so again, there's a number of workflows that work to make this happen. This is a pretty out of the box report. Like, I'm not looking at anything that every single person could go into HubSpot and create this within about 30 seconds. Someone who is skilled at revenue operations should be able to put this into your account, look at this, and then be able to tell you, oh, hey, most of your contacts are offline sources, or in this instance, all of your contacts are offline sources. Let's figure out where they're coming from, and then let's attribute that revenue back to marketing, back to sales, or back to other channels. And so the talk track here is not me explaining this is how I'm going to do that, but it's opening the dialogue for making sure that if you're at an organization and you're not thinking about some of these really fundamental things, which very fundamental reports are able to tell you, then you really need to make sure you have a champion on your team who is able to facilitate those conversations. Because again, I look at this and my first thought is, okay, offline sources, is this marketing contacts? Is it sales generated revenue? Let's build some workflows to answer those questions. And if you're curious about what those workflows look like, reach out to us in our Sprocketeer Slack and we can talk more.
Yeah, this is the famous attribution conversation, which is always interesting. The attribution conversation, it's something that needs to be talked about. But if you make it the best way, and I think the RevOps approach is always the way that we define it is science of sustainable growth. To know that, you need to know what are those things that are making the growth happen, right? If you want to have that sustainable growth and you don't know why or who you can attribute with those leads or what's happening, then how do you grow, right? That would be the question. How do you grow if you don't know what is happening? 3, what's the next action with that? So if it answers, okay, I know what to do next, that's good attribution reporting. If it doesn't answer anything, we might need to review it.
A lot of the people who may be tuned in were talking about reporting and attribution, this common theme of being able to read between the lines. Any organization can go into HubSpot, pull in that original sources report out of the box and look and see, oh, hey, most of my contacts are offline sources. But being able to really drill down and understand the why are they showing offline sources, and then being able to answer that with, okay, how do we turn this into attributing the answer to that to revenue? That's why you need to have a revenue operations professional on board who really knows their stuff. And I've been putting a lot of content out lately about how internally at every organization, like you have to trust your revenue operations person, because if you don't, and if they're not able to ask the right questions and help you to get the right answers, then you really need to be looking at who's on your team. Because
Yeah.
revenue operations people, like, we're not geniuses in terms of like experts at knowing literally everything at any given time, but our role is to be a practitioner of RevOps, as you have a practitioner in many other fields, where we're always learning and being able to ask the right questions so we can try to get the right answer.
I think this is a perfect segue to ask a question that I always get asked. Here in Latin America, we don't have revenue operations. Is something that it's even in the conversation in terms of agencies or whatever. Like it's very straightforward sales, marketing. Like revenue operations is not in the conversation. So whenever somebody asks me for the answer, I do want to hear your answer. And Mark, if you want to chip in of how do you explain it to somebody that has never heard, okay, I'm a RevOps specialist and this is what I do. Yeah, what's the answer?
Mark, I'm curious your thoughts.
Yeah, I don't know if I think
Or are
I
you to the
told
wolves?
I told Cameron when we first met at Inbound last year, before I took a job 5 years ago or so, the target audience was RevOps. And I literally had to Google this question and never got a very articulate response from it. And so you ask 5 different people, you're gonna get 6 different responses from like a technical level as opposed to the philosophy of it. Essentially, it's taking those operational teams that were separated for the different go-to-market organizations, whether that was customer success, sales, marketing, taking those operational teams and putting them under one roof. Basically, ensuring that the systems and processes and tools that ensure revenue and revenue growth are all speaking together and have data integrity throughout. And that's on a technical level, that's what it is. There's, I think, a lot more philosophical discussions around what it is as well.
And I think the answer changes depending on who any of us might be talking to, because when most people outside of our world might ask, what do you do? The answer is invariably, I help companies make more money. Because that's like just a really basic thing that people can understand and go, oh, okay. When somebody's a little bit more in the know, they're involved in tech, they are keen to have a bit of a more full answer. to what was mentioned earlier, I subscribe to the definition of revenue operations being the science of sustainable revenue growth. And so usually I could tell somebody that and they're not going to know what it means. It's just a jumble of words to them, though. And so to articulate what do we do, it's the function of aligning sales, marketing, and customer success with the end goal of helping everybody to do better in their roles.
And that brings me to a point that we talked about once, Cameron, which was it is way different to appoint somebody internally to do that than to hire somebody for the specific reason that sometimes the person that's going to do it internally is going to look out for his job, right? So it's some things are not going to get aligned like magically, and some things are going to get aligned very fast. And if you have that RevOps person, he can, from a high level, be your partner and tell you the truth and be that single source of truth with the CRM, and but having better answers in regards to it, not worrying about, okay, he's doing this to keep basically the role that the person have, because we all want to make money, we all want to make sure that we do our roles well, but as soon as that is being asked, we can, my dad used to always says, like, words talk and they can even lie. So not words, numbers talk and they tell lies. That's the phrase. And you can do that. Like, you can actually put makeup on the numbers. So we take out the makeup and we show things how they are. And probably if they're internal, they won't do it sometimes.
And that speaks to the heart of revenue operations, which typically you don't define something by its end state. So like the notion of, well, RevOps helps companies to generate more revenue. We're not here to write the scripts for the salespeople. We're not here to tell marketing what ads to run. So this notion of we help you to generate more revenue, it's not because we're able to do everything in the organization, but we're able to look at the data and bring alignment across these teams. And so ultimately that reduces friction internally. It produces the end result, ideally, of generating more revenue. But generating more revenue is, again, more that end goal. We don't look at our jobs and at the end of the quarter say, we made the business bottom line increase by X, right? We say we brought alignment in processes that helped to increase revenue. Or, oh, previously you didn't have visibility into this and now you do.
And there are some keywords that we have repeated over, which is finding out the why in a deep level so that we can have an alignment that leads us to adoption of the processes, and then we can reduce that friction, and therefore like a flywheel. So those 4 words, why, alignment, adoption, and friction, were mentioned a lot in the call. So yeah.
As the great Robert Jones says, sometimes you got to take a ride on the flywheel of life.
Yeah, I'm going to tag him and see if he actually said it.
It's in one of his videos. Thank you for listening to what I hope were some very practical tips that we were all able to bring to you today, both in terms of reporting and how to decipher it. For those of you who don't know and aren't a member of our community, please do make sure you check out the show notes, because we do have the link to join Sprocketeer with our Slack community in the show notes and as a comment on LinkedIn or the show notes on other platforms. Sprocketeer is the largest community for independent HubSpot admins. So again, if you're not a member, check it out. There's a ton of really amazing people on there. I also encourage everyone, if you're not already checking out the HubSpot admin user group hosted by Kyle Jepson and Deanna Goloff, do that. It is Tuesdays at 10 o'clock a.m. Central Standard Time. And if you're not familiar with our past episodes, you can check them out on YouTube and Spotify.
Awesome. Can't believe it's been an hour. So
it has been an hour. I hope the time went by as quickly for everyone else as it did for us.
Yeah. That's the hope.
Mark, as always, pleasure to be doing these episodes together. Rodrigo, thank you so much for joining us. I think we are definitely going to be doing a reunion episode shortly.
Thank you guys. It was awesome to talk to you guys. Yeah, hope that we get to do it again.
Thank you for listening, everyone. Sprocket on.